Many people in the church hold to extremely tight rules, and often get highly offended when people flout those rules or make fun of them. One of the most commonly cited reasons for those rules is the acts that they forbid offend God. Now, with so many rules and regulations being woven into the biblical narrative and the law as a part of it, one can't help but break a couple of those rules as life happens, yet few enough of us get smitten by God. Now, naturally, that presents three theories. One, he doesn't exist. Come on, people, don't fall on this one. Two, he's in such a rage about it, he stopped caring. That I can't blame him, but considering that Jesus died for us, I don't really see that there's a strong enough case for that. Thirdly, he's more tolerant with this than many people give him credit for. Naturally, I subscribe to the latter, but far from being tolerant about blasphemy and sinfulness, I think he's actually not only peaceful, but has a sense of humour. Now, many comedians will claim otherwise and run circles around it with their own jokes, but I've seen a few things firsthand that suggest to me that God does have a sense of humour. Now, since it is far from conclusive by any stretch of the imagination, I'm going to bring up as much evidence as I can in this essay and ask the question: does God have a sense of humour? In order to understand this question, we first have to ask ourselves what humour is. This is a tricky thing to nail down, since comedy is a broad profession with varying areas that get different people laughing. There's stand up comedy, there's satire, sitcoms, and of course witty panel shows, and all of them take their place in the 6 o'clock comedy slot, 6:30 comedy slot, on Radio 4. In some ways, humour is an art form. Someone's theorised that it's rooted in sexual transgression. So that could be a low swearing, could be just being inappropriate comments at very amusing times. There's certainly enough of one to keep some comedians in business, whilst walking the line on some of their jokes. This naturally implies here that the edgier the joke, the funnier it is, which explains Frankie Boyle. Is that to be directed outwards or inwards? Since some comedians are self deprecating and make fun of themselves. Classic examples are Deliso Chiponda, Jack Carroll, and Warwick Davis. So, is humour all about making fun of people? I don't think so. Sometimes the funniest things are those that are unexpected, like movie bloopers. I mean, we've all seen Matt Lamont messing around the set of Friends. And I've often got through don't laugh challenges on YouTube by predicting the punchline of the video. Not always successfully, but still. Perhaps it's all down to assuming certain things and suddenly changing that perspective. That's what I think most jokes do. They set up an assumption that you make, and then suddenly they bring you out of that assumption quite suddenly. Perhaps the best part of anything like that is when someone either breaks character or continues in character despite the fact it's obviously gone wrong. Puppeteers often do this in very funny ways. The best one I can really get behind are the Australian musical comedy duo Sammy J and Randy. Now, Randy, on a couple of occasions, as part of the show sketch, has come out with lines that pretty much point out he's a puppet, such as, "What's going on? My eyeballs aren't real." Further going on to, "I haven't got any eyelids. How am I supposed to wink at you?" That's the classic one. Even mentioning one sketch that he hasn't got any legs, so someone's got to go on the roof. Another example of this can be seen with the English fox puppet Basil Brush. He did something very similar on The Last Leg, where the presenter invited him to read the intro to the break from an auto cue. I can't do this justice, so I'll leave a link to it in the description below. I know I'm terrible at this, but I'm getting better, I hope. So hopefully you'll find it. Some shows have situational comedy that just has funny things crop up as and when, such as Just a Minute, The News Quiz, Outtake TV, and Have I Got News for You? Others deliberately have comedy worked in, like I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue, The Hollow Men, My Family, and Chucklevision. This shows that something can be funny for just being in the right place at the right time. It doesn't necessarily need to be contrived. That's why I think find bloopers so funny. It just happens, not because they do it deliberately. That being said, you know it's meant to be funny, or suspect it's meant to be funny, you're more likely to laugh, because the atmosphere has changed. Randy Feltface has explained that he has to sometimes explain to his audience that this is a comedy show, otherwise it could get easily offensive. And famously, a pastor once said that he was moved up the schedule. No one else was told that, and he was put on stage at the time a comedian was meant to be on. As a result, people just kept laughing at him. And many people say, "Of course, he's a pastor. That's going to happen." Not necessarily. While some pastors sort of weave jokes into their sermons, there's no need to go quite that far. To give a few personal examples, I myself like putting on personas when I'm out and about, and I found it worked quite well in Australia. When meeting people from other countries, like Germany, or even talking to Aussies who call us Poms, I put on the full Blighty man, the very posh English accent. I put it on even more when meeting the Northern English, making sure I deliberately cultivate a southern accent. When meeting people from nearby counties such as Norfolk and Essex, I put on the Caterpillaroni warrior. In a similar vein, I once put on the suspicious C of E man when inquiring if a young lady was Catholic, after being scolded, slapped with the hand, which reminded me very strongly of my grandmother. Another time, I was just chatting with a lass, saying how my dog, or at least a friend's dog, was eyeing at my sandwiches. He wasn't going to get any, so she said that I was being hearted, and probably would be to her. A bit later, the conversation changed to what she would have for breakfast. I don't know, but she finally settled on a sandwich and coffee. When I asked about the sandwich, just in conversation, she was so vague about it. I asked if she had somehow nicked mine. All these interactions were received in the manner they were intended, which is good. But I also know that some jokes can be deliberately hurtful, or just make fun of people. I've faced that more than a few times at school. My method of dealing with that was just take ownership of the joke. Namely, if it's something bad about me, I correct them on it. Say that it's much, much worse than that. Hence, it's almost like I'm fact checking them, and hence the joke isn't theirs. It's not fun anymore. I own it. Doesn't always work, but it's still helped me. So humour is an art form of some sort, and so it's subjective. Therefore, it can be taken far beyond the funny into the offensive or downright hurtful. So does this mean God has a sense of humour? Well, many people might say that he doesn't, because it takes offence at people taking his name in vain, and some people even suggest that we should reserve many titles for him and for him alone. Whilst I think taking his name in vain is akin to crying wolf, it still shows that shouting the wrong word can cause problems in the wrong place. For all that, it is a very amusing thing to note that God can't doing a joke. I mean, Rowan Atkinson, in his most recent performance of the Warm Welcome sketch, not only used more recent jokes like reserving a space for Trump in hell, but also welcoming all those who watched Monty Python's Life of Brian, with the explanation that God can't take a joke after all. Now, this isn't just us claiming it, because the Bible heavily implies God is willing to exact vengeance on those who offend him. God sends all manner of disasters on the Pharaoh of Egypt for not releasing the Israelites to Moses on command. He wiped out nearly all life on earth with the flood when people weren't following him and doing many evil deeds, not just being wicked and slapping each other. Ricky Gervais made a very, very good sketch about that. Well, very good stand-up routine. I didn't watch all of it, but I got the gist of it, and you could tell he was reading from a children's book. Speaking of children, in the infant Gospel of Thomas, Christ had a bit of a temper as a young child and wasn't afraid to strike people down with his godly powers. And even in his ministry, in the main Gospels, he rebuked a tree for withholding fruit, causing it to wither and die. And famously, in the same chapter, he chased the scribes and moneylenders from the temple with a whip, which has, for some reason, led my friends to constantly send me that meme that, when asking what Jesus would do, remember throwing tables and chasing people with a whip are within the realm of possibilities. I honestly do not know why he said that. So God is more than capable of defending himself and punishing people for their transgressions. And yet today, people who take his name in vain, ignore his commandments, or use titles for themselves and others, aren't suddenly turned to salt, whipped, drowned, or beset with great plagues. Though the slaughter of the firstborn bees is still considered a good idea, and we are coming towards the end of a pandemic. Just saying, God's wrath is great, but it doesn't seem extended to the multitudes of people who blaspheme him on an hourly basis. In fact, I got inspired to do this. I got inspired to do this project. Some tales of God doing just that. Not just the pandemic. I heard a story of how someone broke into the Vatican. Just have a look around. When he came out, he got hit by a moped. Yeah. A classic clip on YouTube shows the police chasing a vehicle in a storm whose occupants had just robbed a church. Not long into the video, the chase car got struck by lightning. My personal favourite is a news story of an of a conservative evangelical who blamed natural disasters on homosexuality and got his home and rally venue washed out in a flood. I know that if I don't say it here, that someone will call me out on this, but I have to admit that these stories are hard to verify and in some cases it's photoshopped. But this shows that God is not only willing to defend himself, but in my opinion, definitely shows he has a sense of humour and is not afraid to make it pretty obvious that he's paying attention. So why was he so harsh back then? Well, when he was first establishing his kingdom, he had to be firm and even a bit excessive, to the point where he decided that the flood couldn't happen again. Now that he has a kingdom and is well underway, he doesn't need to use such drastic measures. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a formidable reputation, which people fear him by. Having a fearful reputation is actually a very useful thing. This may result in people testing his patience, breaking into and stealing from holy places, and using God's name to promote hate campaigns and so forth. But at the end of the day, who are we to know that God sees the same things as funny as we do? One of my favourite verses in the Bible, I can't remember off the top of my head, I'll reference it on screen if I remember, is in Isaiah, where God himself says that he doesn't think like us and does things differently. Sometimes when the literal quote is, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways." But I myself have used my dark reputation to unnerve people and make a point by the right actions, not as what God has done. To explain, I used to be well known at school for using pens as weapons. I'm not proud of it, but it started a rumour that I was working up from crayons through pencils down to pens, and soon I'll be on to knives. That didn't actually happen, but if I see any of those people who started that rumour, I'd be more than happy to show them my dagger. That method of using reputation is helpful. And I can see God doing something similar and using it in such a way that the observant person might well laugh at it by making the unexpected expected. Now, don't get me wrong, God does prefer us to do things a certain way, as do we all. But it's clear as long as we follow his underlying will of peace, harmony, and goodwill to all the world, he doesn't mind what we do specifically. For all that, however, it is helpful to be careful just what you do. Just want to say something. God can make a move and land an amusing strike at any moment. It doesn't have to be amusing for us at the time, and it can come in some very unusual forms. There's the last example I can give for this, and it's of a friend who is polyamorous. For those who don't know, polyamory is when you have multiple relationships. Now, his wife is aware of this, as is his girlfriend, so it's a pretty easy situation. And when I was rather confused, he said that I could ask any questions about the situation. He was perfectly open to that. I didn't. I probably should have, but now I think his baby daughter is a big joke on the both of us. Me for assuming and not asking the important questions, for example. And for him, because he had more important women in his life he probably should have. And since both he and his girlfriend were hoping for a baby boy, he now has more girls in his life than he knows what to do with. Now, we may call it irony, sod's law, karma, or just hilarious bad luck, but when we get down to it, the correlation between the testy action and the amusing reaction is there. It's a vague correlation, but it is there. Whilst I have to admit that correlation and causality are completely separate things, along with some of the reactions being less amusing than we might wish, God has told us he doesn't think like us. We can't understand what he's thinking, and so we can't understand his sense of humour. Another example I can give, just off of my head, is an example given in Terry Pratchett's I Shall Wear Midnight, where he mentions a bright young wizard called Simon. He was cursed by the gods to have every ailment under the sun, but because the gods had a strange sense of humour, he also understood everything. You could almost say that a classic example of that in our time might be Stephen Hawking. He had motor neuron disease, and so can't move, can't walk, found to a wheelchair, and yet he is the most brilliant mind of any generation today. I can't deny that. He may well be an atheist, he may not believe in God, but I can't deny he's an absolute genius. Who else can explain how the universe works but with game at tennis? It may seem a bit nasty that he's now bound to a wheelchair, but something subjective is just as likely to be offensive to someone as hilarious to others. And unless you can understand the people in the situation, you can't understand why they would react that way. So next time someone points out something funny and says that it's God's will, don't be too quick to dismiss it. If God is out there, he's probably got a joke lined up for you. And he might spring it when you least expect it. And if you don't believe in him, then you won't be expecting it at all. Just a little warning. May God be with you.